Welcome to the Curious About Nature podcast. This is a podcast for folks who want to connect with nature and rewild childhood. Hosted by Rachel Mills, Buttercup Learning's founder, an educator with 20 plus years of experience with a passion for animation, the natural world and conservation. Rachel focuses on getting digital kids outdoors and having fun in nature, promoting well-being and a can-do attitude to local wildlife conservation and sustainable living. Join her and her guests for their stories, experiences and tips to support outdoor learning and nature connection.
Welcome to the Nature Curious podcast. This week I'm joined by Julia Bedford, who's a student herbalist, artist, vegan, chef and food activist. Hi there, Julia.
Hello, Rachel. Hi.
It's lovely to meet you. I've been following you a little bit on Facebook and your journey around foraging and herbalism. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm a Londoner, born and bred, but I've been living in Glastonbury now for 9 years. And one of the reasons for leaving the city was so I could be closer to the plants, so I could actually step out my door and feel confident with what I was picking and where it was growing. However, when you go back into cities, the plants are everywhere. So it's not like there aren't any plants. They grow up everywhere. When I was really little, I remember I got a herb garden for my 13th birthday. And so it's always been there. The plants have always been in the background. I remember early memories of lavender in the front garden and bees and grannies all over it. And a memory was, I think, with Melissa, with lemon balm. And I remember being tiny and being like, wow, this plant smells like fruit. That was in someone's back garden. So there are plants everywhere. But now I've come into Glastonbury. I was doing lots of cooking workshops, teaching people particularly like vegan food, fermentation, things like that. And I started to notice that the foraging was coming in. Yes, I've started a project Herbal Brue, and that's primarily about showing people how to forage and make medicine and wherever we are.
Yeah, I can connect with that actually, because when I was a child, I was fascinated by the flower fairies and used to collect rose petals to make perfume. And my parents were keen amateur gardeners, so we always had lots of flowers and things. Interestingly, they didn't grow that many veggies when we were growing up. It was tended to be things like fruits, like blackberries and raspberries. But when I moved to Bristol, became really keen on growing my own food, and then from that realising that even, like I said, even within that city, there was so much produce that you can find just through foraging. So it's really interesting to me as well. So how did you go from what you were doing there as a child and then as a grown-up? How did you get into herbalism? What was that kind of thing that ignited that interest?
I lend my ear a lot to people. We're all living in a community, but I live in a sort of quite an ad hoc small community on the edge of Glastonbury, and I noticed that I like to give, but I would like to give more and in depth and in a deep way with people and their health. And lending an ear is a good thing, a cup of tea, but if I could go in there and be like, hey, when was the last time you felt well? What can we do? How can we do this? And I actually just really want to be able to go on that health journey with people. And it just seems like I've got the food side of things, but with the plants, there's a depth to them. There's a magic to them, obviously. You've already mentioned the flower fairies. That I feel like it could be like detective work with people, of like finding out what they need and what plants are for them, and then actually seeing what plants is on their doorstep. So it came around from actually, that want to really help people in a way, but not in a like saviour way or anything, but sort of biotic way between yourself, the plant and the people. Yeah.
So if there's anyone listening and they think, oh, I'd love to start out in this, what tips do you have?
Someone asked me that the other day, and I said, step out onto your doorstep and the first 3 plants, engage with them. Find out what they are. Find out their story, find out their history, their myth, what poem goes with them. And then maybe if you want to start looking into their health properties, you can see how they start relating to yourself as well.
You mentioned obviously the resource of nature itself. Are there any kind of other sort of favourite resources, maybe books or groups or podcasts or websites that you've used in your own journey? Or
yes,
maybe you've come across and thought these are actually really great?
Lots. There's also Julia of the Herbs. She was amazing. She was a British woman, but I think it was like in the 1930s 30s. She went up around the world and she like met with all different cultures, different gypsies, learned from them. And there's a beautiful film online on YouTube of her, Juliet of the Herbs. So people could look that up. And she's just so, you can use this for this, you can use that for that. And she's just like, it's that no nonsense approach. So she's a real hero as well. Books wise, just, I'd say, I've got so many. There's so many beautiful ones with artwork, like Nathaniel Hughes, who's intuitive herbalism, and he's worked with Fiona Owens, and they've created this beautiful artwork that's all got gold in it, of the plants, and each plant has these different characters. I suppose the Seed Sisters as well, they've got a couple of books. They've just brought out a poisonous plant one about flying ointment. So it's what some people really like the scientific and some people really like the myth and the magic, but I quite like the mixture of the two, so equally as exciting. Resources, finding groups like my own sort of thing and like-minded people. When you find a planty person that you can talk with, that's just like, oh, here we go, let's talk herbs. And that's, I think, finding kindred spirits is really important too.
Yeah, finding your own group, little collective of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One of the things that I do with my family is that we try to keep a nature journal, not regularly, but just when we're inspired. I was just curious whether or not that's something you do. Maybe do you document any of your foraging trips, or maybe you have a journal for herbalism possibly?
I've got a receipt book. So,
Ah.
yeah, so it's instead of recipes, it used to be called receipts. So the person, the housekeeper, would have that, and so they would write in their different recipes and different finds and things like that. So I've got one of those. So that's kind of the like one for me. But then obviously due to doing all the walks and everything, I document everything. I'm just like taking photos of people with plants and then seeing the different seasons. So yeah, I've got a book that's just for me. And then I've got all the photos that I take because I love inspiring people. That's what people like to see, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the art side is that because I'm studying at the moment, when I have the chance, I do love to draw the plant as well. So
Nice.
yeah, that's a real, and draw with the plant. I drew an echinacea and then was like using all like grass. It's not colour fast or anything, but it's just having fun as well, isn't it? So
Yeah.
green in, let's use some grass and just get that on the page and things. So, yeah.
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 Yeah, we used to. I think one of the fun things we did last summer was daisy and dandelion prints with my daughter, and just seeing what you
Yeah.
could mush into the paper and what colours came from it, and not just flower pressing, but like you
Yeah.
said, just squeezing what you could get out of them. And it is, I think it's so interesting that people who make paint from what they find.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting, I think, history around that as well, that maybe some of us have lost touch with because we just expect this thing to come out of a tube, don't we? I mean, the amount of time and effort and energy
Yeah.
and labour of love that goes into making those supplies from natural pigments.
Exactly, that's what I've done. I've done quite a bit of natural dyeing as well, and like working with pigments and making ink and stuff. And you have to explain to people that this is like it's a living thing as well. It's not like you get your acrylic paint and there it goes, and you're going to have this bright pink. It's going to change over time. It's going to change depending on the sort of acidity of things that you add to it as well. So it feels like real sort of magic and alchemy when you start working with plants like that as well. Have you done the hammering thing where you use,
Yes.
where with the fabric and then you put the plants in between and you get everyone hammering on the...
Yeah, I had to watch out with my 8-year-old. I think she was about 6 at the time when we first did it, and she got a bit enthusiastic, and my fingers were a bit close to the fabric. But yeah, it's a fun project for all the family to get involved in, isn't it? Definitely.
We got told off at a festival because we were next to, I think they were having a quiet moment in one of the tents, and someone was really like, they wanted to use up a lot of pent up energy and whacking this fabric. And yeah.
Brilliant. So one of the things that I'm really interested in at the moment, because I live in North Somerset, is this tradition of herbalism and foraging that goes with the local area. I'm just curious, why do you think that is? Why is Somerset such a hotbed for foragers and herbalists?
I suppose in some ways we've got different landscape here as well. Where I am, obviously we're down where plants like to have their feet wet, aren't they? So we've got lots of willow around here and horsetail and things like that. But then in other areas, you go up into the hills, you're going to have different things. And I suppose it's less central here, so people are going to have to just look after themselves, aren't they? They would have known seasonally what was going to come up. They were going to know what their family and their community needs. Yeah, me and a friend have been wondering who the actual wise folk were. Who was the wise person in Glastonbury? Who was the wise person in Street? Where did they live? Because it's all, a lot of stuff will probably go back to the abbey and the monks and stuff like that, which obviously that was a way within this country that we've got a lot of things recorded about plants. But yeah, I think it's that just the fact that people just needed it, and they would have been working with what was on the land and what was there, and yeah, we would have just been doing it for ourselves, wouldn't we?
Yeah. I think you've been exploring herbal stories, haven't you, from within the community and that kind of
Oh
wise.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yeah, it's been really interesting. We did a project. It's still in fruition. We're going to make it into some zines. Yeah, remembering remedies, and we went round. Starting in Wales, we went to all the different village halls around Wales, which was just a lovely thing to do anyway. And like hearing people's stories, and it was very interesting that there seemed to be the people that had this a rich herbal background seemed to have Welsh grandmas. That was something that was coming up. So there was still this sort of connection with the land, whereas there was a lot of disconnect, and people equated it to when the NHS came and there was free prescription. So there was like this sort of severing of when people might have used something, and it was like, actually, no, we've got this now, so we can do that. But we got some lovely stories of people, granddads having bubbling elderberry wine by the fire, that they would just have a big spoon of that if they were needed. And then one woman came, she's from Ukraine, but she's moved here with her twins. And her connection was totally there. There was like grandmas were doing that on both sides of the family, paternal and maternal. There hadn't been a disconnection. There'd been a sort of, we want to protect and hold on to these remedies and these ways that we do things. It was interesting to see someone from a different culture where that herbal memory hadn't been forgotten things. Yeah, that was lovely.
Yeah, it sounds like a great project. Really emotive as well.
Yeah, but it was. People loved it. People were like, can we just talk more about herbs? When people get going, they're like, can we just meet for tea and talk about herbs? I was like, yeah, we'll try and do that. Yeah.
Will you publish those stories as part of a book, or what's your idea for the end of the project, or if there is an end even?
I love zines. I love little publications that can be just picked up, either like photocopies, passed on, can be super cheap sort of thing, and a kind of punky anarchist aesthetic. So that's what I'm imagining. It'll have the recipes, maybe there should be more odd recipes as well, and then the people's stories. But I think it needs to have, what was coming out was this thread of why we've forgotten, what we've forgotten, and how we can start remembering that. So I think that has to come through, because I feel that's what people are yearning for. So I think, yeah, some little zines. And then we were talking about possibly taking it into a city and seeing what stories we get there, because we'll have such a different variety of people there, and see how the first one goes and see how it goes from there.
Yeah, I can imagine it already.
Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. You mentioned there a little bit about connection, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about how can we connect our families, ourselves to nature more, do you think?
I just think going for a walk, for a walk with other people, or going somewhere that people feel safe. Not everyone feels that as well. I felt that sort of difference of coming out of the city, where you're like, okay, you have this very set places where you can move around, to suddenly being like in the countryside, and you're like, can I pick on this? So yeah, having a walk with people, being somewhere safe, starting conversation, starting it gentle, I think, and just bringing it in that way. People are very protective over their health and very protective over what they need. So I feel like if you go in hard, it's saying you must have this, or you should take this, or any of that, people just don't want to listen. Learned this through being a vegan. The vegetarian life all my life is people don't like soapbox, they get defensive. Yeah, I think that connection starts by just being gentle with each other.
And I know one of the things that you do is foraging walks. Do you have a favourite season for foraging?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, they're all beautiful in their own way. I must say January is not the best time necessarily, but we've had such a funny season. We've only had a few frosts. There's still things popping up. But I do love, as it turns in the summer and then you start getting the long shadows and then like suddenly you start getting more of the seed, and then things are a bit dusty, and then suddenly you notice the rowan berries, and it's like August, and you're like, wow. And then suddenly you're like, the elders are here, and suddenly it all starts piling up of, oh, I must do this, I must do that, I must do that. So I probably would say, yeah, the end of summer going into autumn. Just, but I love them all. Spring is just such hope, isn't it? And that smell when you're like, spring is on the air, and yeah. But for now, I'll say I love them all.
I'm curious whether or not you've noticed changes over the last couple of years, maybe over a longer period of time, regarding things like biodiversity loss, the changes in the landscape. Are you seeing less or more of different species of plant or animal?
It's an interesting one, because what I've noticed since we were little is, I don't know if it's because they can't necessarily afford it anymore, but I've noticed that there are a lot of places left to grow more, especially like by roadside, by motorway, by this. There's not necessarily places you want to forage. However, it shows the biodiversity. And I've noticed that in the last 10, 15 years, definitely wildflowers, the ones that are left, are allowed to grow. However, there's some techniques that are so brutal in the way that they do things, especially the way they cut hedgerows with those big trimmers and stuff like that. So a lot of the plants that do come up, they come out of necessity of how the land's being managed. But it's always a fine balance, I think, man, isn't it? That it's that balance of, oh wow, somewhere's really letting the wildflowers grow, and somewhere else digging up hedgerows, kind of thing. But I just think that plants are just so tenacious; they just want to grow. I have mixed emotions, because sometimes I feel like there is definitely a lot, and you notice it, and it can get quite frustrating and sad that we're this marginalised pieces of land, and that it's here, but you have the hedgerows, but then the hedgerows are all related to the enclosures, and it's like, so all this history of land leads us up to this point where we're sort of all funneled into these marginalised bits of land, and then we find what's there. So there's this glory of being able to find as many blackberries that you can gorge on, but at the same time, this sort of awareness that we're pushed into certain bits of land. Sorry, it's what it's making me think. As soon as you start foraging, you can't help but think about the land and in it.
Yeah, I think for me it's what we leave behind for future generations. What's going to be our grandchildren's experience of the land around them? I have those emotions where sometimes I feel quite positive, and then other times you notice things and feel sad about the state of biodiversity loss in the UK. I'm curious what you're up to next. What's going to happen for you in 2024?
2024, I will still be knuckling down to my course that I'm doing, because I'm studying medical herbalism now. I'll be into exams and then into my year 3 as well. But I want to continue. I want to work in different projects and move around, because we did this year of foraging in Glastonbury in the same site and showing that monthly we could make medicine. But what I'd love to do now is like start going to other growing sites, other projects that are established, and then seeing what they've got, so we could almost start making up like a medicine chest, like knowing, for example, Paddington Farm, the grower there has just dug me up lots of inula root, so we know that's where we could get that. Whereas if we went somewhere else, we know that they've got a whole field of dandelion that isn't next to the road that we can dig up. So that's what I'd like to do, start almost mapping a kind of medicine chest in a way, and then we know what we've got, and that's what we can have between us, sort of thing. And
yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's like sharing the local resources, isn't it, for your community, and obviously through your classes and through coming together with like-minded people, you can share that knowledge, which is excellent. Yeah. It sounds like you're going to have a very busy year, especially with the exams as well, stage 3.
It's always busy, isn't it?
Yeah, very much.
But that's the other thing that I loved with the plants, that almost does away with a to-do list, because they dictate what you need to do. So it's okay, we're in the season and we've just done fire cider and we've made wreaths, and it's okay, that's what we're doing, and we're going to do some baskets in the new year. And if you can't do it, people go, oh, I forgot the elderberries this year, and it's sorry, they'll come back next. And I think that's one thing about working with the plants, is it really helps you let go of that sort of need to do all the time in that respect. So thank you, plants.
I love that comment, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think sometimes we live such fast-paced, busy lives that we forget to stop, and there's this tendency to want to do everything. But actually, it's okay to just stop and enjoy it. Enjoy life, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yes.
Where will we find you next year or between now and January? Where do you usually hang out, in person or online?
Okay, so I am based in Glastonbury. I've got a website which is herbalbrue.org.uk. Obviously, social media, Facebook as well. And yeah, and people can get in touch. They can send me an email if they want, which is julia@herbalbrue.org.uk.
Yeah.
So yeah, just is brew as in BRU.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia, for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, looking forward to lots of foraging and herbalism in 2024.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Curious About Nature. If you would like to keep getting nature and outdoor learning stories and tips, hit subscribe in the podcast so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to give a 5-star rating and review to support our podcast reach. To deepen your child's connection with nature and natural world education, please check out the Nature Curious subscription box. Head over to the website buttercuplearning.com to further support your family's nature journey.